Is that a hot take? I think it's kind of reasonable, but I mean, it's still, when you talk about trading a guy of Jaren Jackson Jr.'s caliber, it feels hot takey.
So let's now go to the Memphis Grizzlies, Mort, who made it into the playoffs, which was already a win in and of itself thanks to the play-in tournament, but did not prove to be much of a match for the Utah Jazz. I think the number one storyline to monitor heading into the offseason for them is Jaren Jackson Jr., who is heading into the final year of his rookie contract, which means he is eligible for an extension. You know, didn't play a ton this year, Mort, and didn't look like his old self when he did play.
Right.
So what is the right price for a Jaren Jackson Jr. extension if you are the Memphis Grizzlies?
So, full disclosure, I'm wobbling a bit on a thing here. I kind of want to play it safe and just answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a part of me that has maybe a hot take.
Oh, okay.
I would want, if I'm Memphis, to try to get Evan Mobley in the draft.
Oh.
And that might require a sacrifice of Jaren Jackson Jr.
Interesting.
I think Evan Mobley is what Jaren Jackson Jr. is supposed to be. And I think Mobley's game is much more tailor-made for Ja Morant than Jackson Jr.'s is.
That's very interesting.
I look, Memphis fans are going to hate me for even suggesting it, and I get it, but I have long-term concerns with Jackson. I really do. He's not a great rebounder, first and foremost, and I think at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not you prioritize rebounding, you still need it. Mobley comes in, he's an immediate rebounder. He's that good. Like, the defense is already there, comparable. Like, Mobley, a lot, like, he projects as a high-end NBA defender, so you get that role in there as well. He's also got a high release point. He's got a very clean shot. Like, he's not going to be as dynamic a three-point shooter as Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren Jackson Jr. as a three-point shooter will always be better than Evan Mobley. It is ridiculous the degrees of difficulty he takes threes, Jackson Jr. that is, and hits them. Like, we've talked about this before. His shot selection and his shot variety from three is insane. But Mobley is just a bit more polished. You can run the offense a little bit more through him. He's a better passer. He's a guy who I think projects as a better long-term player than Jaren Jackson Jr. So if there's a team out there that's still all in on Jaren Jackson Jr. and they have a very high draft pick, preferably second overall, which I think is where Mobley should go, I wouldn't hate if the Memphis Grizzlies took a step back and said, okay, we might not be better next year, but we'll be better in the long term. We'll give up Jaren Jackson Jr. We'll give up maybe a couple of, oh God, I hate saying this, we'll give up like Xavier Tillman or Brandon Clark because they have to give up more to get Mobley. They just do. And then we run out Ja Morant, Evan Mobley core from there, and then we build accordingly. I think that's the play. Also, it gives them more financial flexibility. Like, instead of then re-upping with Jaren, like, after this year, they get, like, not a do-over, that's a bad word, but they get a new guy on a new rookie deal that lasts for 4 years. Providing them with financial flexibility. Is that a hot take? I think it's kind of reasonable, but I mean, it's still, when you talk about trading a guy of Jaren Jackson Jr.'s caliber, it feels hot takey.
I don't know if it is. I think it would have been last year. Yeah. But given what happened this year, I don't, last year I would have said Jaren Jackson Jr. is almost a no-brainer max extension guy.
Right.
Now I would not give him a max extension. And that's not saying he couldn't earn it this year and then you can do it next year in restricted free agency. And I don't know if this is necessarily a fair comparison, but I think you have to look at what's happening with Dallas and with Kristaps Porziņģis in particular, and at least have that in the back of your mind when you're negotiating with Jaren Jackson Jr.
That is tough. Yeah, I agree with you, but that's like, every Memphis fan who listens to this all the hairs on their arms just starting raising.
Yeah.
Like it's.
I mean, it's fair. Look, I mean, I hope Jaren Jackson Jr. gets back on the trajectory that he was last year. Because I think if he does, he's a great fit next to John Morant. But you're now reaching the point where you know John Morant is the centerpiece of your franchise for the next at least 7 years, ideally, and hopefully much longer than that. You are building around John Morant. So now you have to decide, is Jaren Jackson Jr. on the type of contract that he is going to want? Is he that foundational piece? Or should we start to look elsewhere? And I don't want to give up on him because he's still so young. He turns 22 in September.
Yeah, so and he's good.
Yeah, there is plenty of room for growth here. And we saw a lot of it last year. This is really just reflective of the injury this year. And, we see like Jonathan Isaac. We saw him take a discounted extension because of the injury history. We saw it with Markelle Fultz as well. Yep. Like you said, even with Joel Embiid, you saw, he took a max extension, but there were protections built in. So maybe that's the solution. But I don't know. I don't think I would do full no-brainer max extension for Jaren Jackson Jr. this offseason. If you can get him, like what Boston got with Jaylen Brown, where you get him for less than the max. If you can get him at 4 years, $100 million instead of 130 some, then I start to more seriously entertain the extension. But
that was the Giannis extension back in the day. That was 4 years, 100.
Yeah, and that one I would feel more comfortable with. It's just, I don't know. I just would hate to get locked into a guy who, I don't want to say Kristaps, but like that's my fear if I'm Memphis.
I think what you're saying is, if I catch you right, is the ceiling could be super high, but the floor could also be really low.
Yeah, and like you don't want, we're seeing it now in Dallas, where because Kristaps is on this deal, there's a real chance that he's going to hamstring the ceiling of a Luka-led team, which totally sucks because Luka is a transformative talent. I'm not saying John Morant is as good as Luka Doncic, but John Morant has multiple All-Star games in his future. He is a star in the making. Yeah. So you have to be very careful now that you have this player. Be very careful who you're choosing to build around him with.
What do you think of my theoretical trade of Mobley? I know you haven't seen a whole lot of Mobley.
I mean, depending on what else you give, like if it's Jackson number 17 and then one other young guy, whoever it may be,
right?
I'd at least entertain it.
Like Desmond Bane.
Yeah, or I love DeAnthony Melton.
Yeah,
but one of him or Tyus Jones, they have plenty of young guys. That's the great thing for Memphis.
Yeah, they would still have a surplus. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's the road I want to go. I'm actually feeling pretty confident in it. Like it doesn't even feel hot takey now that I said it. I think Mobley is that guy. I think he's the guy who fits next to Ja so much better. And it's a shame because I can see the potential there in Jackson Jr. Like there's definitely a chance that he goes elsewhere to the team that he's traded to under my, fantasy world here, where he becomes a stud, like a superstar. And then I would look back at it and go, oh, well, geez, that was dumb. But you also have to take into account that what he's shown right now over the first 3 years, it's inconsistent, I want to say.
Yeah. I think that's a fair way to phrase it.
Yeah. Okay.
So the other big decision Memphis has financially this summer is what to do with Justise Winslow. He has a $13 million team option, and the long-awaited Justise Winslow breakout season did not happen this year. In fact, he only played 26 games, started in one of them, 6.8 points on 35.2% shooting. Played, I believe, 3 minutes in the playoffs. Just did not play a ton. So
I'm done.
You're not picking up the team.
Nope. I'm done waiting. he's just never going to be that guy, I think. I know that we're looking at him missing piece and all that.
Yeah.
Look, I always thought that NBA Twitter, for example, was a little higher on him than I was. Like, I could see the talent level, but I think we reached a point where it just became ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Like, the expectation level and the trust in his capabilities. Yeah, he's solid when he's fully healthy in like a fourth option role, but I'm just not there where I would trust him to stay healthy. I don't even know how to play him. I would much rather just give the ball to Ja and to D'Anthony Melton or Jaren, or post touches to Jonas Valanciunas than I would want Justise Winslow in there taking up possessions for virtually no reason.
I just looked. He had a true shooting percentage of 39.5 this year.
Right.
Wow.
He's generally been a bad shooter. I mean, he had that one outlier year, which was also his best year in 2018, 2019, where he shot 37.5% on almost 4 attempts per game. Like, that's where we're looking at him going, oh, see, we're the optimized version. But even then, I mean, I still wasn't blown away by him. I really wasn't. I understand he was like a two-way guy who could handle the ball, who could defend, switch around and all that. That's nice, but I don't know. I think there's a significant ceiling to what he can be as a basketball player.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ideal version was, point Winslow. Like, he can be that secondary ball handler type, because he did average 4.3 assists per game in that season. They only played 11 games last year, but he averaged 4.0 assists per game. Yeah. But now I'm starting, especially having seen what happened with Josh Richardson after he left Miami.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if Miami's just plugging all these guys into point forward roles because they were just waiting for Jimmy Butler to come. And they're like, oh, actually, just because you can do it doesn't mean you're good at it.
Right.
I mean, Winslow, like, he's overcoming major injuries, so I don't want to totally discount that. So, he could be... I agree with you. $13 million for a guy who didn't produce much this year, and I don't know what you can project out of him moving forward. That seems steep. I don't blame Memphis for making that trade last year because they didn't give up all that much in terms of, these guys were all going to leave most likely at the end of the season anyway.
Yep.
So, take a gamble, see if he gets healthy, see what you have in him. And if he pans out, then the $13 million team option isn't that bad. That's a totally reasonable price. But, it just didn't work out. So don't double down on the mistake.
Yeah. Go in, like, that is 13 more million you have to spend in free agency.
Right. And if they turn that down, they could have like close to 30 million. So if you're Memphis, who are there any guys on the market who you'd be going after in particular?
So there's a name. We already brought it up on this show. I just don't know if he fits like from an age perspective, or maybe that doesn't matter.
Okay.
I do think they need another scorer who's really reliable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hate the idea of Norman Powell there.
Oh. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's a fit, to be honest with you, because they have Dylan Brooks. They obviously the shot amount is going to go up for Ja as he ages. Like Jonas Valanciunas was finally unleashed this year, and he did super well. Mm-hmm. And they already have a lot of these playmaking guards and like shooters. They have Desmond Bane, Melton, as I mentioned, like Tyus Jones. They have a lot of guards. Grayson Allen, although you can sort of cut him out of the rotation, I think. But they just have guys, right? And I don't know if Powell would fit in there, but I kind of like the theoretical fit of him next to Ja at the very least. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if they want to spend that money. Now, they could be creative and do something else, but that would mean pivoting away from that whole Jaren Jackson Jr., Evan Mobley thing, and try to go for upside with John Collins. But I don't think Collins is a Memphis player.
Yeah.
Like, they play defense.
Right.
They really prioritize ball movement and defense, so I don't think he's that guy. Neither is Lauri Markkanen. So I don't even know if, like, the restricted free agency market is a place where they can find a lot of options. So, but I would just rather have the flexibility than I would have Justise Winslow. Then, if nothing else, I can take on a bad contract. Like, let me ask you this. If I can get 30 plus million, I think you know where I'm going with this, in cap space, right? And I can absorb a really crap contract. Like, let me just look at it. If I can create $36,016,200
is that
cap space.
Yeah.
How much? I actually need to do more, like, because there are obviously going to be different guys that are going to be attached. But
right,
like, if they take on Kemba, fully knowing it's a 2-year contract, and they just get a ton of picks, a ton of young players, do you do it or do you just lay off?
No way.
Okay.
No way.
All right.
If I'm OKC and I'm a little further behind the rebuild, maybe, but no, I wouldn't.
Yeah, because they're playoff.
Yeah, I wouldn't waste 2 years of John Morant's,
that's fair,
rookie contract on Kemba Walker. I mean,
I had to ask. Yeah,
that's fair. I think you're right to bring up restricted free agents, though, because I mean, A, those guys are just going to be younger by default.
Yeah.
But B, I think that's where the value is in this free agent class. Like, you could go after a Norman Powell, like a Tim Hardaway Jr. would be a potential upgrade right away, but those guys are, pushing, they're like closer to 30 than they are 20.
Yes.
Whereas restricted free agents, yeah, I agree. John Collins, probably not a good fit in Memphis, not going after Lauri Markkanen. I don't see the fit with John Lonzo Ball necessarily. But
no, I wouldn't hate it though. Like, I think that would be fun. But
it would be really interesting.
They have so many guards, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but like, I could see throwing a bag at Gary Trent Jr.
Oh, I didn't even think of that one. That's a good one.
I mean, this is what if I'm a team with cap space, I want some team to do what Sean Marks used to do and just throw big offer sheets at these guys just to screw with the other team. Like, Toronto should not be allowed to retain Gary Trent Jr. at a reasonable price.
No, but like, so how far would you go? I agree. So Gary Trent Jr. would be like the perfect Memphis player.
Yeah, I would do like 4 years, 80 to 90 million probably.
Right, like really push that up because he can play the 3. Like, he can come in and take Justice's role. Like, he can come in and, well, that's probably Dylan's role now that I think about it.
Yeah, Dylan can move up to, like, you could do Ja, Gary Trent, and Dylan together.
Right. Yeah, so Dylan slides up to the 3, or, God, see us, we're still talking about NBA positions. It's such an archaic thing. You and I both agree that positions are meaningless, and still every single time we talk about it because it's just burned into the fabrics of our minds. But yeah, so the wings would be Brooks and Trent, and they would be pretty interchangeable. You have Kyle, who can come in as like your ultra Swiss Army knives 2-way 6-man. You have Jaren, you have the depth up front with him, Jonas, Brandon Clark, Xavier Tillman, and even in the backcourt you also have Desmond Bane. Bryan, I love this one. That's a good idea. I love that one. Like, Gary Trent Jr. should be, I'm not saying maxed out, but good Lord, like 20 plus at least. And to the point where it stings for the Raptors to match.
Yes,
exactly. If they even do.
Exactly. Or if you don't go after him, a Josh Hart could be interesting. Bruce Brown feels like a Memphis player.
Yeah, he does. But no, you like, every name you come up with now is going to be underwhelming after you brought up Gary Trent Jr.
Right. I'm not saying Josh Hart or Bruce Brown. I wouldn't give those guys $20 million per year. Like, Gary Trent would be my main target, but that's where I think Memphis should go. Younger restricted free agents, and really, push these, even like a Talen Horton-Tucker with the Lakers.
Yeah. That's a good one too.
Like, Duncan Robinson, if you want to add shooting.
Yeah, I guess he's on a similar age bracket. He's like 26, 27. You can make that work, and plus he's a shooter, so age doesn't really matter a whole lot in that regard.
Right.
Yeah. No, I'm still locked in on your Gary Trent Jr.
Yeah, me too.
Because he's a comparable shooter, I want to say, to a certain extent. Like, he's not as fluid a shooter as Duncan Robinson is, but I mean, he's high volume, high efficiency. I mean, that's something right there. And he's only 22. He's going to get better. Like, if Memphis walks out of this summer having traded Jaren and something else for Evan Mobley, and they sign Gary Trent Jr. in free agency, that could be a finals contender in 5 years.
I mean, my hot take is that Portland screwed up and should have traded CJ at the deadline and kept Gary Trent Jr.
Yeah, and I disagreed with you at the time, but I think you're right. I stand corrected. I think that would have been preferable too now.
Yes, especially given what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. God, again, Memphis, they're so interesting, right? And it's not that I want to shake up their roster. Like, I know doing that, or I think I know trading Jaren would do that, but I think there are avenues wherein they can improve and still improve right off the bat as well. Like, Jaren for Mobley is a long-term play, but then if you sign Gary Trent Jr., you kind of offset the long-term play so you remain competitive in the now.
Right.
Like, Gary Trent and Ja Morant, who will be a year older next year, I mean, that's right there. That's an established duo. And then you have Dylan, who's in his prime. You have Jonas, who's in his prime. You can do all that and still wait for Mobley for a couple of years until he becomes like fully ready.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Yeah. I think we just fixed Memphis.